Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yu Jung-cha, responsible for the ASEAN market at KCCI. We'll now begin the 2022 Korea-ASEAN Business Forum. We are working to identify the tasks or the projects for the cooperation between Korea and ASEAN, and we are working to promote a cooperation between Korea and ASEAN. And we are trying to enhance our cooperation and in connectivity and logistics. We are going to be hearing presentation from Professor Sun Park of Korea University, and we are also going to be hearing from Dr. Satrio Adhitomo of Indonesia, Deputy Director of Non-Bank Financial Institutions of the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Indonesia. And we're also going to be hearing the presentation from Dr. Shin Yun-seo of KIT. And we are also going to be taking questions from you. If you post your questions to the YouTube channel, we will do our very best to provide you with the answers. The conference will be posted on YouTube for about a month, and afterwards our conference will be posted on KCCI website. Let's invite Professor Park Sun for his presentation first.
녹색 누르면 되는 거죠?
시작합니까?
Shall I begin? Good morning. My name is Sun Park from Korea University. It's a great pleasure to meet with you. Today, I would like to talk about the current status of economic cooperation and future direction between Korea and ASEAN. I've been only given 20 minutes, so let me briefly talk about what I have prepared today. So this is my agenda. I will first talk about the current ASEAN economy, moving on to the Korea-ASEAN economic cooperation and future cooperative direction. So as of 2021, let us look at the GDP and exports and imports of ASEAN countries, as well as population and per capita GDP. Indonesia is at the top with GDP, and Vietnam is the second largest exporter in ASEAN, following Singapore. So it's engaged in an intermediary trade, so it's mostly focused on exporting its own goods. And let us look at the key economic regions and their sizes, especially the position of ASEAN in the world. So in ASEAN, there are around 673 million people, which is the third largest, following China and the EU. So the EU has around 450 million people, so you can see how much population ASEAN has. And its GDP has reached around 3.3 trillion dollars in 2021, which is a little less than Germany, but a little more than the UK. And its exports is around $1.7 trillion and imports 1.6 trillion won. And you can compare this with Korea, which stands at 644 billion with exports and 615 billion with imports, which is 3 times smaller than that of ASEAN. So ASEAN has a lot of potential, but especially I'm focused on its relatively young population. I mentioned that it has around 670 billion people, and relatively the proportion of the youth is quite high. So let's talk about age dependency ratio, which means the ratio of working age population to non-working age population. And in Korea, this age dependency ratio since 2020 has been rising. It means that the number of non-working age population outnumbers that of working age population, which is not as such in ASEAN, which demonstrates great growth potential going forward. And the big advantage of ASEAN is an integrated economy. So when you look at the individual countries, their economies are small, but when you look at them combined, the countries are able to create enormous synergy effect. So in 1967, the Association of South Asia was launched, and the AEC, ASEAN Economic Community, was launched afterwards. And except for India, and including RCEP, ASEAN has been expanding its opportunity and potential in terms of the economy. And let's now talk about the economic cooperation between Korea and ASEAN. Now, ASEAN is one of our most important trade partner. As of 2021, it was the second largest export destination and the third largest import region. So ASEAN had recorded $108 billion of exports with Korea that was smaller than China but larger than the US. And it's following China and the US, the third largest import region. And our trade account balance is a surplus of $41 billion in 2021. So our cooperation with Vietnam is the strongest in ASEAN countries, considering trade and investments. So trade has been increasing with ASEAN, but what would be the reasons? In fact, import and export to ASEAN and from ASEAN had been induced by Korea's direct investment in the region. So from the 80s, investment continued. That dropped in the 1997 foreign exchange crisis, but from then on it has been rebounding and growing. So as you can see on the graph, compared to the investment amount, the share of investment is quite high to ASEAN, meaning that a lot of small and medium enterprises of Korea are operating in this region. And as a result, as you can see on the graph on the right, the share of export reaches around 18%, demonstrating the large amount of exports to ASEAN. Here you can see Korea's exports by ASEAN countries. As you can see on the slide, Vietnam leads the way, and when you look at other countries, compared to 2013 and 2014, the trade level is lower right now. So this is the most important problem of trade between Korea and the ASEAN. Here you can see Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines that has been experiencing a decrease in trade with Korea. Of course, in 2020, it has risen a little bit, but compared to the past, it's still not that high. But trade with Vietnam has been surging. So moving on to the next slide. So one other important aspect with our trade with ASEAN is their experience of Korean culture. So Korea has been doing a survey every year focused on Korean TV series, beauty products, entertainment programs, and so on, to understand which country consumes the most amount of Korean contents. So if we take a look at Indonesia, in 2020, 41.5% of their population answered that they have watched Korean TV series. So when you consider the population of Indonesia, this is an enormous amount of people. And with entertainment programs, 35.3% of the Indonesian respondents have watched Korean entertainment programs. So in films, webtoon, game, and music, Indonesia leads the way in consuming K content. And Vietnam, Thailand, and other countries are also large consumers of Korean content. Let's move on to human exchanges, which is quite active. Before COVID-19 in 2019, you can see the trend of mutual visitors between Korea and ASEAN. So you can see that from Korea, 10.46 million people visited ASEAN. And it's not on this table, but this year, that year, around 5.6 million Japanese visited ASEAN, especially Southeast Asia. So compared to Japan, when you think about the population of each country, around 4 times larger people from Korea visited ASEAN. And also from ASEAN, there are a lot of visitors to Korea. 1.04 million people visited Korea in 2010, and in 2019 the number has increased from 1.04 to 2.68 million. And when you visit Korea right now, you can see that a lot of Southeast Asian people are traveling in Seoul after the spread and the lockdown due to COVID-19. Now let us talk about our future direction for cooperation. Let me touch upon some of the key points. Still, ASEAN is very important to Korea, considering the Korean demographic structure. As I've mentioned, the working age population in Korea will continue to fall, giving rise to the age dependency ratio. Here you can see that this ratio is continuously increasing. So in the end, to maintain our prowess in manufacturing, we need outside support, which will come from especially ASEAN. Then in terms of economic cooperation, what can we do for ASEAN? So there will be a few. And on the top left, well, in Thailand, I searched the number of users of Naver's line. So this data is from Nelson. And in fact, in Thailand, there are 69 million mobile internet users, among which 45 million use Line from Naver. And I also brought a picture of the Samsung's Galaxy phone. So in terms of advanced technology and digitalization, we have potential to work with ASEAN. And on the right, you can see BTS meeting with President Biden of the US. And below that, you can see Im Yoon-chan, who created a sensational feedback around the world this year with his piano performance. So we can say that Korea has global competence with culture. So I think culture is another way we can contribute to ASEAN. But right now, the economic cooperation between ASEAN and Korea is quite unbalanced. On the graph, you can see the trend of trade balance with ASEAN of Korea and Japan. Of course, Japan has a longer history with ASEAN, but at least in terms of goods account balance, we've been maintaining a balanced trade situation, especially Japan has maintained a balance, but Korea has been experiencing and continuously increasing trade surplus. So in order to achieve co-prosperity in a sustainable manner, this is an issue we need to overcome. So, what should be our future direction in cooperating with the ASEAN? First of all, we need to develop policy to resolve this imbalance. For example, we need to focus on materials, parts, and intermediary goods by making more investment in ASEAN. And we also need to strengthen efforts to develop import goods from least developed ASEAN countries. We also need to expand the investment opportunity in countries other than Vietnam, such as Malaysia. So this means we need to encourage Korean businesses' investment in other countries as well. And secondly, we also need capacity building of ASEAN. We are providing ODA to ASEAN. And I think this investment should be redirected to capacity building of human resources in ASEAN. And also, we need to think about how to resolve the regional gap of ASEAN. And ASEAN itself also needs to reinforce its ability to absorb and learn technology. They have been continuously asking Korea to transfer its technology, but when Korean companies visit ASEAN, they always face an obstacle saying that there is a lack of high caliber manpower. So, of course, it's understandable that ASEAN is wanting more technology transfer, but ASEAN also needs to understand that there is an obstacle clearly experienced by Korean companies when doing so. Though governments in ASEAN must make more investment in talents and R&D and also work on transparency, corruption, and income gap issues. Without transparency, it would be a hindrance to Korean companies, and corruption will pose a lot of difficulties to Korean companies, and income gap expansion will hinder its investment in talent. And with expansion of income gap, there could be uncertainty in the political landscape of ASEAN. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
So we'll now move on to the next presentation. And the next presentation will be made by Dr. Satoru Adhimoto of the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs. We are having trouble with a connection. If you could just bear with us for a few seconds, we will be connected to our next speaker.
예, 지금 인도네시아 현지
We are having trouble connecting to our Indonesian speaker. So we will now change the order of the presentation and we'll listen to the third presentation first. So Dr. Shin Yun-sung is going to go first. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shin Yun-sung of Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade. And since we are making the presentation via Zoom, I don't think we'll have a concern of contamination or infection. So I will take off my facial mask. And our second speaker is having trouble connecting to the Zoom. So I'll be making the presentation before our second speaker is to make the presentation. I visited Indonesia in January, and in February I visited Malaysia. And I've seen that the lockdown is almost removed, and there's a freer movement between ASEAN and Korea. And I thought that we would have less online conferences, but as you can see, we are still having online conferences. And we are communicating through online venues, and we are still able to meet each other regardless of the place and time through online conferences such as Zoom. And I believe that online conferences will continue to take place as these are quite efficient and effective in enabling us to communicate. And so let me begin my presentation. I'm going to talk about National Technical Qualification System. And I believe that the National Technical Qualification System has contributed greatly to the Korean economic development. And I believe that such a system could help ASEAN to continuously to grow and develop. And KCCI is also preparing to provide technical qualification systems to other countries. My previous speaker has also talked about the need for human resource development development, and I will also talk about the technical qualification systems system and why it's needed. And I will be talking about ASEAN opportunities and challenges, and I will talk about Korea-ASEAN economic cooperation. And here in the second part, I will talk about what sort of economic cooperation is needed, will be emphasized. And I will also talk about how to overcome the trap of the mid-level of the country. And I think that would be quite essential. So let me first talk about the opportunities and challenges faced by ASEAN nations. After COVID-19, if you look at the global economy, there are many different types of challenges. And since the Second World War, some say that we have the worst economic recession. And as you can see, since the time of COVID-19, the global supply chains have been interrupted, as you know. And in June of this year, there was an invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and that has even worsened the supply chain trouble. And so automobiles and the semiconductors and other products have it's become very difficult to buy them, and they have led to the increase of the prices. And so the countries and the companies are storing these products. They are keeping those products in inventory. And also the commodities, the price system also have increased quite dramatically. And the increase of product prices as well as increase in the commodity prices have led to a very high level of global inflation of around 7%. Well, some say here in Korea, the salaries have not risen, but other things have risen, such as the prices of food and others. And the central banks of other countries, Korea as well, are increasing the interest rate, the policy rates very quickly. And as you know, the central banks are increasing their interest rates in steps that are called the big steps and giant steps. And so we're looking at the interest rates that we have not witnessed before. And with the prices hike and as well as the interest rate hikes, we expect the economic recession to take place next year. And the GDP of this year is expected to grow by 3.1%. However, the GDP growth of next year is expected to be around 2.2%. So with global economic recession, countries including China, the US, and EU are coming up with trade policies and that will protect their own interests. And so international trade as well as international investments are moving towards protectionism. So next year, so that is 2023, international trade and international investment are expected to be quite stagnant. And this is going to have a great negative impact on developing nations. Despite these difficulties and challenges and very negative outlook, however, ASEAN countries are growing to become new engine for growth. And I can say this because a lot of investment is flowing into ASEAN despite the economic difficulties. Why is that? The global value chain is changing. For instance, the FDI that is flowing into ASEAN, following last year and this year is increasing, and that is despite the economic difficulties and recession. If in 2005, if you look at the East Asia value chain, China is at the center, Korea and Japan are sending intermediate goods to China, and China would make the final products and will export them to the US and EU. So that was the structure in 2005. At that time, China was named as the global factory. But if you look at 2015, well, the production base has moved from China to ASEAN already. And since 2015, if you look at the global value chain, the China, Korea, and Japan were among these where we see that ASEAN has risen as a production base for these three countries. So Korea, Japan, China will be sending in the intermediate product to ASEAN, and instead of China, ASEAN will be manufacturing the final product and will be exporting to the United States and EU. Korea, and they are also sending their final product to Korea, Japan, and China. So ASEAN is replacing China as the global production site or global factory. And so with us in this trend, we believe it will be accelerated thanks to CPTPP and RCEP. So with the emergence of ASEAN as the new economic power, the economic cooperation between ASEAN and Korea has entered into a new chapter. So let's look at the status. Let's look at the investments first. Before 1985, investment was mainly from Korea to ASEAN. Korea was investing in resource development, such as wood and coal. And since 1985 until 2005, Korea was investing in ASEAN, in particular, such in labor-intensive industries such as clothing and shoes. And after that, from 2005, the global value chain began to change, and ASEAN began to emerge as the global factory. So the petrochemical and semiconductor and electronic components were being exported to ASEAN nations. And the product being exported were more high value added, and there were more production taking place in ASEAN. And the investment in ASEAN increased dramatically. Of course, there is year-to-year differences. However, we do see that during this period that there was a dramatic increase of Korean investment into ASEAN. And at that time, the Korean culture has become very familiar to ASEAN consumers. And Korean and consumer products are produced and consumed in ASEAN countries. In particular, cosmetics under the name of K-beauty have become very popular. And Korean factories are, of course, investing into ASEAN factories in order to produce these consumable products. So on an annual basis, excuse me, around this is generating about 80.9 billion won worth of added value, and over 5 million jobs. So this added value and jobs created by Korea, I believe, are contributing greatly to ASEAN economy. So in the post-COVID era, the cooperation between Korea and ASEAN member countries, well, you see that that ASEAN has a great potential for growth. They have great resources as well as human resources, and so there's a there has to be a good economic cooperation. But Korea does not have much natural resources, but people. But Korea is number 5 in terms of manufacturing capability in the world, and Korea is the first country to produce electric vehicles in ASEAN. And in terms of semiconductors, Korea is number 1 globally. And also when it comes to IoT and home appliances, Korea is all global number 3 or number 4. So that is the economic status of Korea. And so Korea, through economic cooperation partnership with ASEAN, is transferring on technology and sharing economic development experiences, and is also cooperating with ASEAN countries to build infrastructure and to share innovation. So ASEAN with Korea, ASEAN is moving from labor-intensive industry to technology-intensive manufacturing industry. And ASEAN member countries are now able to participate in higher value-added trade. And intra-ASEAN trade, of course, is increasing in ASEAN. And ASEAN, as you know, has 10 members. And with the increased intra-region trade, there is an acceleration of ASEAN economic community. However, ASEAN-Korea economic cooperation is faced with new challenges. And I believe that these new challenges can be categorized into 3. 1 is supply chain, 2 is ESG, and 3rd is human capital. In terms of global supply chain, ASEAN is not able to be as integrated as EU. And if ASEAN is to be integrated as EU in terms of economic integration, well, there has to be very stable supply chain put in place first. ASEAN, as you know, are very diverse in terms of ethnicity, in terms of economic development, as well as religion. The GDP per person in ASEAN, which was mentioned by Professor Park, between Singapore and other member countries, there's a great gap. I understand there's almost like 10-time difference in terms of GDP per capita within ASEAN, and there's also a vast cultural differences. And if these differences are not overcome, ASEAN will be faced with some economic risks. And I do believe that the solutions need to be found to overcome these differences. And about ESG, ASEAN is able to become the global production site thanks to low labor wages. However, with the strengthened environmental, social governance frameworks, in terms of supply chain, well, the social responsibility, environment, and transparent governance are more important ever before, and they're being emphasized ever before. And some nations in ASEAN member countries will have introduced ESG framework, and I believe that the remainder of the ASEAN nations also need to introduce ESG as framework to be truly globally, to be in line with the global standard, to be able to have more trade with other countries. And I also want to talk about the human capital. ASEAN, for the member countries that continues to grow, there has to be improvement in terms of education and training. Well, in terms of financing as well. And they have become somewhat of an obstacle for the continuous economic development of ASEAN. And as ASEAN is moving from labor-intensive industry to a higher value-added industry, and that is the reason. And the reason is related to human capital. If ASEAN can develop higher quality of human capital and receive more financing from other countries, well, there will be more investment from other countries, and there will be better productivity and competitiveness. And today, I want to emphasize this much. There's something called the middle income country trap. And that is when a country a country grows very quickly till the GDP per capita of 3,000 to 6,000. However, nations' development becomes stagnant when they reach that is the GDP per capita of about $30,000 or $40,000, and that is because the countries have not been able to develop high value added industries, and that is why OECD countries call this middle income country. And some countries in ASEAN have already been caught in the middle income trap, and so in order to overcome such a trap, the countries need to have very stable supply chain, and if ASEAN has a very stable supply chain with Korea, this is going to be very useful in overcoming the middle income trap. And for the ESG, well, there's a saying in Korea, if the ASEAN countries only are focused on their own market, ASEAN will not be able to overcome the trap and grow. And for ASEAN countries to become truly global, they do need to accept ESG standards, as ESG standards have become global standards. And then lastly, there needs to be a development of human capital. And if there is increased cooperation between Korea and ASEAN in these three areas that I've mentioned, the supply chain, ESG, and human capital, then I believe that ASEAN will be able to transfer its labor industry to be more high-tech, intensive, and will help ASEAN countries to have very sustainable development. And now I want to briefly mention the National Technical Qualification System of Korea. Korea is a country that has human capital as its only resource. Korea does not have much energy resources or of natural resources. We are dependent on other countries for those resources. And so Korea's economic development process was a process of developing human capital, of developing human capacities. When developing countries, they know about the importance of human capital. However, there is always bound to be a mismatch within the labor market. The demand that will be the industries, and the workers will be the supply side. However, there's a mismatch. What sort of workers are the industries requiring, and are workers? Do they have the necessary capabilities and capacities to satisfy the requirements of the industry? And however, there is a mismatch. So the industries, they require very skilled workforces. However, the workers, they do not know how to enhance their capabilities and capacities. And the workers sometimes are just doing very simple manual work. So there's such a mismatch. And so in Korea, we have many organizations such as KCCI contributing to make these workers truly skilled workers. And so KCCI is providing a system to test and certify these workers in terms of their capabilities, so that the industries will be able to procure the workers that they need. And this began back in 1967 and 1962. And Korea has been operating such a system on behalf of the Korean government. And the Korean government back in 1960s did not have much money, and the KCCI had a national network already. And so KCCI was able to help the government out in terms of developing the workers at the workforce and also provide the necessary certification and the licenses. So that has helped to the Korean economic development. And KCCI is currently issuing and managing over 14 qualifications and is contributing to provide the needed and appropriate workforce to the industrial sites. And this will help workers to better find their work because they know what they need to do in order to enhance their capabilities and also enhance the capabilities so the workers will be paid higher salaries. When we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and in this fourth industrial revolution, a person, where somebody say will be able to feed tens and thousands of people, but it's not. But that is not easy, to produce such a person, and for that person to be, that person will have to hire, tens and thousands of such workers to be able to feed them. But that top leader or that person, such as Steve Jobs of Apple or of Elon Musk of Tesla. So, these are people geniuses. We should not be providing education and training in order to produce these geniuses, because those geniuses do not happen often. And we need, we need to develop people and the workforces by providing them education, and based on the education, the workers should be able to take their qualification test and be certified with the licenses. And with those licenses, the company should be able to know who to hire. And the international companies should be able to also employ these workers with the licenses. I know that workers with these licenses, they still need training on the job, but these workers would have the minimum needed capabilities and can save costs for companies. And that was the case here in Korea, and I'm sure that this will be the case in ASEAN member countries. So for Korea and ASEAN, I understand that there is a talk and planning going on in order to cooperate for national technical qualification system. And I hope that Korea's education system and passion for education will help ASEAN countries. Of course, there are criticism about the Korean educational system, and it is a very tough, very competitive system. But we don't have a choice because we don't have any other resources. But there's a saying that there's no pain and no gain, and but I believe that Korea's experiences and know-how will definitely contribute to a continued economic development of ASEAN. Thank you very much.
그럼 이어서
We'll now move on to the economic recovery strategy through ASEAN and global cooperation by connectivity and logistics by Dr. Satrio Adhitomo.
네, 안녕하십니까, 여러분.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you to invite me join for this forum seminars. Then I want to sharing about what Indonesians doing and what ASEAN doing to get more stronger cooperation between Korea and Indonesia. Yeah, as we know, last 2 years, the international is fighting for COVID-19. So almost all country have no choice to recovering their economy, and all country, I think they have same experience. Their economic is getting down. So we have no choice to recovery our economy only by the vaccine. So vaccine is the game changers to uh, re reorganize our economy structure to more stronger. Then now, pardon. Now we can see on the screen in the 2019 economy growth Indonesia still 5%, but falling down in 2020 is minus 5.3%, and 2020 quarter four still minus 2.19%. Then after the almost all people in Indonesia, they have injected by the vaccines. So economic is growing up. Step by step, economy and connectivity is opened by the governments. So economy stable in 5%. So as we know, Indonesia is the highest population in ASEAN's country with almost 280 million people. And of course, the main contribution for our GDP growth is contributed by the consumption, trade, and then also tax. But as we know, the top 5 investor by the country, and the Korea is number 5, 1.8 billion US dollars. So if the Koreans business looking what the opportunity, you can see in the right side is the transportation is the number 1, the transportation, warehouse, telecommunications, electricity, and the last one is the construction. So economy is growing up, and almost all the investments still focus on the Java Island. So in the Java Island, we have 6 provinces, West Java, 5 provinces, West Java, DKI Jakarta, and then the last one is Central Java. Sorry, cannot run. Okay, so Indonesia Korea Cooperation Economic Partnership Agreement (CEPA). We have bilateral cooperation with the Korea. This is outside from the ASEAN. So the scope of the cooperations is divided by the seven scope corporations. So from good trading, trade facility, and then the last one is law and institutions. So sector will be covered in the like the online game distribution and logistic and others way. So from this IKSEPA, among Korea and Indonesia, success to liberate the tariff. Korea is liberate 12,232 tariff line. Also Indonesia is liberalized 10,813 tariff line. So it will be good for the business sector. So because you can reduce your operational costs to access export or import from or to Indonesia. I think it will be good to the increasing the trade between Korea and Indonesia now and for the future also. Next, please. Okay, so now we are starting to ASEAN. This is the ASEAN milestones. The ASEAN is established in 1967. Is initiated by the five big countries in Asia, in ASEAN: Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and also Singapore. Now ASEAN is integrated in one community. So what is impact or benefit from these ASEANs? Next, please. Okay, we can comparing between the first ASEAN established and then in the 2020. In 1967, the GDP is still 122 US dollar, but 2021 is already 5,284, 48, sorry, 48. And also the population is getting higher from 185 million people, now 673 million people. Also, the total trade is also increasing. It means the ASEAN give the positive impact for the ASEAN's members country. So now Korea ASEAN Plus is joining Korea as the new member in outside ASEAN's country, have the cooperation for the free trade agreement. So we hope Korea and ASEAN can be collaborate for the trade, for the innovation, for the investment, also for the technology. It will be give the mutualism between Korea and ASEAN's members country. Next, please. So ASEAN now is divided by the three pillars. We are focused for political security, and we are focused for economy, community, and also social culture. It will be follow up. It already follow up by the ministerial levels. So in 2023, Indonesia will be the chairman for the ASEAN's meeting. Next. So we can see the highlight of the ASEAN economy. As we see in the left screen, you can see almost all the country in ASEAN economic growth is falling down when the COVID-19 diseases fighting with us. Economy is minus. Now in 2022, we achieved 5.1%, and we predict in the global conditions in an insecure economy global for the next year, we achieve, and IMF also predict the economic ASEAN still on 5%. Then if we see the trade balance between ASEAN's country in 2029 last year, is recorded by the 3.3 trillion US dollars. It's increasing from the previous one, 2019, 2.8 million US dollars. So in 2022 also we are looking the potential increasing, because in the first semester 1.8 trillion US dollar, and also in semester 2 1.6 trillion US dollar. It means totally is 3.4 trillion US dollar. Also investment showing increasing. Next. So if we are see what is the master plan of ASEAN connectivity in 2025, it will be divided by the 5 strategic area and 15 initiatives. We are focused for the sustainable infrastructure. Also, if we know about the almost all country in ASEAN try to upgrade their infrastructure conditions, because they want to improve their connectivity, their access to support mobility, people mobility, and also we are focused for digital innovations and logistic, regulatory, and also people mobility. This is 5 master plan of ASEAN. So in 2025, we are focused in this area, and we hope economy and then stability and political, it will be stable and will be, especially for the economy, will be showing increasing. Next. And yeah, if we are see on the screen, this is only the highlight, the logistic performance in Indonesia, and then comparing 5 country here. The infrastructure point is still medium, but lower than Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. Competence also lower. So tracking and tracing. Then based on this LPI, logistic performance in Indonesia, we try to improve our infrastructure. We try to improve our supporting for the logistic. Next. So we can see the logistic cost is Indonesia still highest. It's predict around 24% of the GDP. It means we need to reduce the logistic cost in Indonesia, more economic, more competitive from now. Because if the logistic cost is still highest, we are worried our competitiveness is getting low. Then it will be give the impact for the trade. Next. So this is the focus for the ASEAN infrastructure. Of course, infrastructure is the main topic in ASEAN's country. Almost all ASEAN's country, including Indonesia, trying to improve the performance and the condition of the infrastructure. We are upgrading the infrastructure. We are spend a lot of money for infrastructure because we are fully understand infrastructure is the main game to open the gate for the investment and also trade. So digital innovation. So from digital innovation, now the production, the seller and the buyer can be directly. So it will be cut the supply chains, and of course it will be reduce the tariff. Okay, next. Yeah, this is about the why we are focused for digital, because we are predict, and all the countries predict digital will be the most powerful to access the economy and access the people, connectivity, and also it will be reduce cost. It will be cutting the supply chains. Then of course from the Korea you can directly selling your product to ASEAN's country by and promote your product by the digitals. We hope we can improve the digitals. Then by the digitals the volume of trade is showing increasing. So that's why we are focused to maintain and improve the digital as our weapon for trade and promote product and doing some export and import from the Korea, from the ASEAN country to others country. Next. Yeah, Indonesia is only the one country in ASEAN who member of the G20 and also members of APEC. So maybe our economy is GDP is highest compared all the ASEAN's member, but the population is showing big, is almost 280 million people. So our GDP per capita is showing low, is showing small. But Indonesia is active in the international forum like G20, ASEAN, and APEC. Next. Then this is the global strategy mega trend for the Indonesia chairman for the ASEAN's dialogue next year. This is how to reduce the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing regional competitiveness, digitalization, industrial revolution, because now we are starting for industrial 4.0, and we are focused for supply chain disruption. And we know energy day to day, year to year is increased more expensive. So we try to finding the alternative energy more lower, more friendly for the ecosystem, for the people. Then we try the economic growing up, and circulation economy is running well, and sustainable financial also. Next. Yeah, this is the portrait of Indonesian chairman of ASEAN in 2023. We are recovery and rebuilding. We are focused for digital economy, sustainability, and this is the expected outcome from the Indonesia dialogue and Indonesia as the chairman of ASEAN 2020. This is a chance for the Korean business sector, who will be active and in charge in these sectors, promoting electromobility, food security, technology innovation, then energy. So we are welcome joining and cooperation with the Asian business chambers. Next. And yeah, as you know, this is we are now using all payment by digital, so it will be circular and support the mobility of the people. To transaction is more easier, more security, and the inclusive money also. We are trying to people more easier to using their smartphone to doing some transaction. And connectivity also, we are upgrade the air, sea connectivity, power plant, data center, and also for security. And this is the main deliverables of Indonesia. Topic will be bring on the ASEAN's dialogue 2020 next year. Next. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for listening my presentation. Kamsahamnida. Thank you.
예, 발표 감사합니다.
Thank you for the presentation. We will now conclude 2022 Korea ASEAN Business Forum, and you will be able to watch the conference or the forum on YouTube as well as on KCCI's website. If you leave us questions, we will try to provide you with the answers later on. Thank you.